All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to our discussion, Numbers, Narratives, and Next Year, America and Texas in 2026. We'll look at the political and policy landscape heading into the 2026 elections. At a moment when the country feels both deeply polarized and rapidly changing, the stakes of the next cycle couldn't be higher. Control of Congress is up for grabs, major policy debates are intensifying, and the influence of President Trump continues to loom large over both parties. At the same time, the way we measure public opinion itself is under scrutiny, with new technologies reshaping polling and growing concerns about whether some surveys are designed more to shape narratives than reflect reality. Today, we are joined with three of the most respected voices in polling and political analysis to help us cut through the noise and better understand what's really happening beneath the headlines. First, we're joined by Mike Basilis, president of Basilis & Associates, one of the most experienced pollsters, known for his extensive work on statewide races and ballot initiatives and his long track record of analyzing voter trends across the state and beyond. Next, we have Chris Wilson, CEO of Eyes Over Technologies. He's a nationally recognized Republican pollster who has worked on campaigns at every level of government and brings deep expertise in voter behavior and messaging strategy. And finally, Jim Henson is the director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas, Hook'em Horns, who has become one of the leading academic voices on public opinion, combining rigorous research with clear-eyed view of how polling fits into the broader political environment. So thank you all for being here. So we will just go right and dive in. So just generally speaking, I know Chris and Mike have some slides and a presentation they want to show. So the just basic general question is, give us your outlook of what you're monitoring, what you're measuring that tells you what you think is going to happen this year in the election.
I think the quick summary, and you're going to see it in some of the slides I'm going to share, is that this election is looking a lot more similar to 2018 than we want it to look like. The attitudes of independent voters are shifting at this early juncture to be leaning a little bit more in favor of Democrat candidates than Republican candidates. And when you have issues like the job approval of the president on the economy, and he's minus 16 on that, that's not a good thing because Republicans usually do better on the economy. But that's a real quick overview.
Great. You want to take us through your slides?
Sure.
You've got the clicker. Yeah, that was the, yeah, green means go. Let's see what we got. All right.
I think we're coming up. There we go. Let's put it in whatever.
There we go.
Okay, let's start here. Gallup job approval, we're looking at presidential job approval is interesting. Not that it's the be-all, end-all, but it tells you a little bit about the landscape. And I think the landscape in an election cycle is so more important now than when we were growing up. Chris and I and Jim, could we tell you what 1,000 gross rating points used to be? You got it on ABC, CBS, NBC with your ads, and that was it. Everyone saw them. Now we have so many different programming options to watch that the eyeballs are on a lot of different things. And the environment is very important, and one's job approval at the presidential level tells you a lot about the way things may pan out. For example, both Clinton, W, and Obama all had job approvals of 50% or more, and they got reelected. But George Herbert Walker Bush in '92, Trump in 2020 did not have job approvals at 50%, and they did not get reelected. And Biden, well, poor Biden, he was in May of '24 in a really bad shape. I think the best thing the Democrats thought they could do is put him on stage. See, he could not debate and find a replacement candidate, but the replacement candidate didn't work out for them. And so let's go back and look at some more job approvals against seats won or lost by the White House in power. For example, 2006, was the 6th year of the Bush administration. His job approval is minus 16. That's like 36% job approval, 52% disapprove, with 31 seats falling from Republican to Democrat. Obama's job approval was only minus 4 in 2010. But if you go back 16 years ago this very month, what did he sign into law? Obamacare. And he pays the price at the ballot box, and 63 seats go from Democrat to Republican. His 6th year in office, he was minus 12 and lost another 14 seats. Trump was minus 9 in 2018. 40 seats went from Republican to Democrat. Biden was minus 12 in 2022, his midterm election, and only lost 9 seats. But keep in mind, redistricting allowed districts in 21 to become a little bit more highly tuned, we'll say. So we knew if they were going to be won by one side or the other. Now, Trump's job approval is minus 16. So that doesn't bode well if you look at history. Let's look at it another way. Let's look at the generic ballot for Congress against seats won or lost. In 2006, generic ballot for Republicans was minus 8. That would be like 40% voting Republican, 48% voting Democrat for generic candidate for Congress, and Republicans lose 31 seats. And you can see through these different timelines that when somebody has an advantage, like Republicans had a +7 advantage in 2010, they won back a lot of the seats they lost in the previous 2 election cycles. If Republicans are near break even, then it's usually an okay thing, not big changes. If they're within 3 points of break even. In 2018, Republicans were down -7 and lost 40 seats. In 22, Republicans were up 3, won 9 seats. In 24, it was break even, only 2 seats lost, but Republicans were able to hold on to the U.S. House of Representatives. So if we look at this across, plotted as points, seats gained or lost on the x-axis and generic ballot on the y-axis, we can draw a best fit line through these points. And the reason for doing this is to see, well, what happens if we are, let's say, break even, Republicans and Democrats? If it's break even, on average, Republicans win about 7 seats. The problem is Republicans are down, as of today, 5.8 points. It was 6 points at the end of last week. And so -6 means a 20-seat loss. I think it's very unlikely that Republicans will hold on to the U.S. House of Representatives. In Texas, Texas has maintained about a 10-point Republican advantage for the last 15, 20 years. It's been, on top-level numbers, very similar in 2010 as it is today. But inside the data and looking at certain subgroups, we've seen that the Anglo respondents in Texas have voted a little less Republican than they had mid-decade or 10 years ago, while the Latino or Hispanic voters have become, in our surveys, more Republican. And so they used to negate each other and maintain a 10-point Republican advantage on average. Where are the Anglos changing the most? In urban suburban Texas. Back in 2010, half of the urban suburban voters under the age of 55 are voting Republican and half are voting Democratic. That's shifted to about a 40-60 split by 2022. And it was Anglos under the age of 55 that changed the most in that 2010 to 2022 timeframe. Now, in 2018, Chris and I lived through this very close race together. He was working for Cruz and I was working for Dan Patrick, but when you have somebody running for lieutenant governor, you look what's happening above you on the ballot. You look at what's happening below you on the ballot. And so we had 1,005 interviews because our client, Dan Patrick, said, let's go through the final weekend. Let's go through Saturday, Sunday tracking. All right, let's do it. And it made for a better prediction because there were things that we saw in the final weekend that were a little bit terrifying. The independents were -22. That is, they were 22 points more likely to vote for Beto O'Rourke than for Cruz. The core Republicans were 98% Cruz. The core Democrats were 97% Beto O'Rourke. So the independents that were the biggest problem were some of the same independents that changed their vote behavior in the last couple of election cycles. Independents in urban suburban areas under the age of 55. They were 30 points more likely to support Beto O'Rourke than Cruz. What I'm seeing in this election cycle is that it's every bit as daunting among independents as it was in 2018. Actually, about 5 points more Democratic than we want it to be. We thought we had things getting under control in our timelines on the independents. Mid-month of October didn't look good, but then we got it down to a few point differential just to see it balloon back again in the final weekend. Here's an example of what happened in one of the state Senate districts. This was Connie Burton, who lost her seat, Republican. She was up by 3, But look at the independents in the survey that was done about 5-6 weeks out, minus 17 or 18 points there. We're seeing that type of thing happen again. How do you get these independents? What I like to do is combine a measure of how one says they vote. Do you vote Republican or Democrat in general elections? Then, what is your image of the Republican Party and what is your image of the Democratic Party? If you're in the red because you vote Republican, you have a positive image of the Republican Party and a negative view of the Democratic Party, you're a core Republican. Those are the 98% that supported Ted Cruz in 2018. If you vote Democratic, you don't have a positive view of the Republican or a negative view of the Republican Party and a positive view of the Democratic Party, you're a core Democrat. 97% of those people voted for Beto O'Rourke. These targeted independents are a way to look at what's not tied down, like the core R's and the core D's. What do those what do the independents think of the Republican Party? By over 2-1, they have a negative image. What do they think of the Democratic Party? The negative image. They don't like either party. They're very upset. So just keep that in mind. One last thing before I turn it over to Chris and he shares his slides. We ask a question usually, and we don't, when I say usually, we always ask it when we get into the final 5 weeks of the election, but we're not even there. But I wanted to ask in a survey 2 months ago, what is your interest in the upcoming elections? And you can see in 2018 and 2022, Republicans and Democrats are usually near similar. Right now, Republicans are 20 points behind Democrats at a level 10 interest. That's an enthusiasm gap that Republicans have to overcome. Chris?
Thanks, Mike. All right, so if you take one thing away from what I have to say, I'd suggest it's this. What Mike just did is he went through polling. It shows you where voters are. And what I do at Eyes Over is try and predict where they're going. And so it's a job I've only been in, or I took the role of CEO after seeing the company about 1.5 years ago. And I will say in 2026, what I've seen is that gap is deciding elections, based where they're going versus where they are, especially in a state like Texas, where margins are tightening and movement matters more than ever. So to talk about the environment, Mike just went through it. It's a perfect segue for me, where he said Republicans 61, Democrats 81. And the bottom line is this is an unstable electorate. That's where it is today, but we see it evolve. For instance, last night, a Republican in Alaska won a Harris +9 district. Republicans won in Georgia. Mike and I were together on Tuesday, and we were talking about how this is really going to be important. What are we going to win by? What is Marjorie Taylor Greene's district? So I'm not maybe as pessimistic as I think as others, because I do see it shift like often week to week, sometimes day to day. And one of the most important signals, though, is the Engagement Act and gap. And right now, Democrats are much more engaged than Republicans at the moment. That doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it is historically a leading indicator of turnout. And in Texas, that matters a lot because the Republican advantage is real. Mike said it's about 10 points. I agree 100% with that. But it depends on who shows up. It doesn't help us if we have a advantage if our voters stay home. And so the key shift underneath all of this is that opinion is moving faster than polling can capture it. And I would suggest that lag is a strategic liability. So let me explain how this works. So this is the core problem. An event happens, people react, and opinion forms. But by the time polling captures it, and I witnessed this working for Cruz in 2024, we had a specific event happen. Well, I'll just tell you what it is. I've actually written about it. It was Beyonce had the rally in Houston Kamala Harris had a rally. Beyonce was there. She didn't sing. She just kind of went out and spoke. And we all kind of made fun of it, right? The next morning, I get a call from Brad Parscale, who was running Eyes Over. Many of you know him from the Trump campaign in 2016 and 20. And says, hey, you guys have a problem. You need to fix it. Right now, she has changed the narrative, and Allred is moved into a lead. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. We're fine. I just got out of the field. We're up by 3 points. Well, 3 days later, we're down. But fortunately, Brad he didn't hang up without telling me what to do. He goes, well, just get him to the border and change the narrative. We did, and the narrative changed. And 3 days later, we're back up. But what I saw in the Eyes Over numbers that were being sent to us was that it happened about 3 to 4 days before the polling did. So all the key shift was underneath the timing of the polling. And so what sort of showed me that opinion is moving faster than polling can capture it. And that's even if you happen to be in the field at the time. Sometimes you're not. And that lag really becomes a strategic liability. So if voters are moving faster, how are they making decisions? Because that's really the key, right? We want to know what we need to do to communicate with them. And what we're seeing on almost every issue, regardless of the topic and every race, is being filtered in 2026 through 3 things: strength, cost, and control. And I promise those green lines looked a lot better on my computer than they do up there. So just, it was supposed to like emphasize it, now it just looks silly, but trust me. So in Texas, this is really very pronounced. If you don't answer all of these three things, and clearly, you lose the voter. So I'll give you an example of this. Iran. Most voters are not evaluating this through diplomacy. In Texas, it has become a kitchen table issue. They're asking, does this show strength? But more importantly, does it raise my cost? Does it raise gas prices? And then third, is it controlled? Or are things just a little bit crazy? And one of the most consistent things we're seeing in Texas data is this, is that foreign policy is judged through what I'll call kitchen table economics. And there's a simple underlying question here is, does this make America stronger without making my life more expensive? And it's a trade-off that I don't think that I've seen before in my career, but it certainly is there today. And if the answer is unclear, that support softens quickly. So, talk about political noise. This is another important distinction because not everything that gets attention moves voters. And a lot of what dominates political conversation, cable news, social media, it reinforces where people already agree. It doesn't persuade. For us to be successful, for conservatives to be successful, we have to persuade. What actually moves voters, especially in Texas this cycle, is felt economic pressure. That's what's on that chart there that I won't read to you, but if anybody wants this, you can reach out to me or Brian and we'll send it to you. But cost of living, energy prices, economic stability. This is where the real movement is happening. So this is an illustration of it. I wanted to show a little bit about how sentiment lifts. Governor Abbott, this is comparing, we track every single governor in the country. And Governor Abbott actually had the greatest increase, tied with Ron DeSantis, and it's because he is aligning border and immigration, talk about how it impacts the economy. DeSantis is doing the same thing, security and governance. Mike Braun in Indiana is doing it on school safety and economic pressure. So sentiment lifts when policy aligns with voter priorities. And I think it's one of the areas that we kind of fail a little bit here. So in terms of overall competitiveness, the three things that make competitive races in Texas is our turnout advantage remains real, but we got to take advantage of it. And I say that with a couple of case studies that I really can't talk about, but I think there are campaigns that went into the primary, the Texas primaries, with an advantage and did not execute on that because of turnout. We have to have a turnout operation. The days of campaigns eschewing grassroots for the purposes of putting all their money on TV have to end. Early leads collapsed without engaging the grassroots in the environment. Again, we've got a real failure in doing that a lot of times in Republican campaigns. And then finally, the coalition alignment. We've got to work within different coalitions with the Republican Party. We've seen the growth in South Texas, the fact that we're winning districts that we never had designs on winning back. I was ED of the Republican Party of Texas in 1994, 95, going into 96. There are districts that we went to that we wouldn't have even looked at targeting back then. And Mike's been around doing it longer than I have there. I mean, it's just amazing what's going to happen. We have got to continue to capitalize on that. So if I'd summarize 26 this way, it's fast-moving, reactive electorate. Campaigns that win are not the ones that measure opinion best. It matters, but they're the ones that detect where it's going early enough to act on it. And that's the difference between reacting to a race and actually shaping it. So anyway, that is, if anyone is interested in it, we put out a weekly report. You can subscribe to it there and see, because we report on this for organizations on a weekly basis.
So, Jim, this is they've reported a bleak outlook, to say it mildly, for conservatives, for Republicans going to this election. Let me add to that, of course, when you look at what happened in the primary, this massive turnout for Democrats on their side. They haven't seen a turnout like this in literally ever. This is the largest turnout for them, at least in the last 25, 30 years. So add to that, the question on everybody's mind that you heard right after the election is this the year when Texas finally turns blue?
Well, I should start by saying I have slide deck envy. I didn't bring a deck, sorry. I was going to shorten that joke, but it was a little too suggestive. Look, I would say no. But as you've seen, I think, from both of these presentations, you and I were talking beforehand, and to be a little cliched and oversimplified, we are looking at what is going to be a good Democratic year. I don't think most people are going to dispute that. It's a matter of what's the amplitude of the wave and what is the height of the seawall in Texas, if you're talking about Texas in terms of answering your question. Is the seawall sufficient? Do you have to, I think, as Chris might be suggesting, add a few more sandbags to the top of that wall? and I will not torture this metaphor anymore, I promise. Actually, I probably can't hold that
What if I have a
promise.
boat?
So, I don't think so, but I think both of the decks give us a picture of the things to watch, right? And the things to watch are, this what seems to be an enthusiasm advantage that Democrats enjoy right now. What can Republicans and conservatives do, to compensate for that and to match that enthusiasm? Or in a more cynical but realistic view, dampen the enthusiasm of Democrats, failing the other, or the combination of the two. In terms of Mike's slides about the Hispanic and Latino political behavior, and you guys both talked about that, obviously something that's generated a lot of interest. I think where I've kind of landed on that is that, if you look at the basic numbers that we did, and we're in the field a lot less frequently than both of these guys are, but our time series based on 5 or 6 statewide polls a year show that if you look at a lot of measures like Hispanic favorability ratings or job approval of Trump, Hispanic party identification, the peak for Republicans came at precisely the right moment in our polling. So the highest job approval rating that we've seen in the series for Donald Trump among Latinos or Hispanics was in October of 2024. Leveled off a little bit and then began to go down, fluctuates a little bit, which leads to the other point. But it's now settled in our numbers not too far from what Mike was showing, right? Which is, to my mind, a few points higher baseline than what we might have been seeing, say, 10 years ago. Favorability ratings in those of Trump in the mid to high 30s, probably a little lower than what we'd see for Governor Abbott, more popular, sort of less controversial Republicans in the state. But the fall-off lesson of that is that I think we're still working to understand, and there's still academic and I think practitioner debate about what the internals of those adjustments are. I would argue you're looking at fundamental shifts that are a little more permanent in male Hispanics, rural Hispanics, and that's where you're seeing that movement. Whether that's exactly right or not, I think that's one of the big questions as we see this unfold. And then the other fall-off on that about Latinos is that, I think it's not news if you look at the data that Hispanics have generally had, there's a big chunk of Hispanics that have weaker party identification than a lot of other groups, a little less fixed, moves around a little bit more, particularly in some groups. I think there was a time when we attributed that mostly to methodological or sampling issues. Overall, I'm beginning to feel like it's really more a characteristic of the group, that doesn't mean there weren't sampling issues a long time or a while back, and there are still sampling issues, but that the party identification dynamic in the group is just different than what we expect from especially African Americans, right, which is the combination.
Mike, I want to come back to you on your slides. What I didn't, your jumping off point was the Trump approval rating and kind of how that sort of determines everything, or the presidential approval rating. What I didn't see anything in your slides about were issues, the issues that people really care about. And so, number one, just generally, do issues really matter, or is this just about, Trump? And then what issues do you think are people going to be running on?
Well, both. But let me just comment real quick about the color blue. Back in 2002, I was asked, what do you think is going to happen by some reporters in the upcoming elections? I said, Republicans are going to win all the statewide. And I still feel real optimistic about the statewide elections in Texas, even though the political environment is not that great right now. And some reporters actually shot back at me, well, you're just saying Republicans are going to win all the statewide races in 2002 because you're a Republican pollster. I said, no, the last time the state was at parity was 94. Let me give you an example. The base Republican vote getter in 1994 in Texas was somebody that lost to Bob Bullock. He got like 37% of the vote. Is there anybody who ran for lieutenant governor against Bob Bullock in 1994? Tex Lazar. That's a base vote right there. A Democrat that lost to K. Hutchison got about 37% of the vote that same year. Back when we had a lot of ticket splitting. That was Richard Fisher, became head of the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. By the time we got into the early 2000s, it was a Republican state, and it's been that way ever since. The state has to turn some shade of reddish purple before it turns to purple, before it turns to purple blue. If they were to win one statewide, that's not a blue state. A purple state is you have half of the statewides and you have one of the two chambers. So they're a long way off from that, all right? That's not this election. The one thing that Republicans did over the time is get ourselves in a position with the Hispanic Latino vote, which is a growing community, because had the Republicans not improved and gotten out of the mid-30s with the Latino vote, then yeah, this state would have started to become purple by about right now. On issues matter. Right now, if you look at the things that Democrats, and they're pretty good about being on the same playbook, they're talking about cost of living. Gene Wu was part of a Texas Tribune story the other day. We were talking with Sherry about this. And his response was to what the interim charges of Patrick and Burrows were all about. And he's like, oh, Republicans are missing the mark. Anything they're talking about has nothing to do with the cost of fuel, the cost of health care. I think the Democrats are going to have a whack-a-mole type of game with Republicans this fall. They're going to say Republicans are to blame for your higher fuel prices. Tariffs by Trump have led to higher consumer prices in your gadgets and your electronics. Healthcare is higher because of them. Your electric bill is higher because of them. So, yeah, issues matter. Cost of living is going to be a big part of, I think, the election. They've already shown that they can stay on a message for a long period of time, and I think that's what they're going to talk about. The fortunate news for Republicans is we have time, of those who help Republicans, candidates, to come up with a narrative and explain why this is a great state, why our economy is better here, and we first and foremost have to do what we can for Texas.
Chris, I want to stay right there. Another pollster I talked to a lot is Scott Rasmussen, who I'm sure you all know, and he said on one of his events the other day that what you see is that even if the Republicans in the House and the president and whatever change some kind of policy today that had some kind of positive effect on the economy, you really won't feel the effects of that for at least 6 months. And so we're sitting here, in April, 6 months from now is going to be, 2 weeks before the election. Do Republicans have the ability to change anything right now that's going to affect the polling or affect the public opinion going into the race, or is it too late?
Yeah, I don't know if that's fair that it takes 6 months. I mean, we looked at yesterday, we have a ceasefire sign, price of oil drops $20 a barrel, and we're going to see that probably reflected in the pump within 2 weeks. So it's not, and the other aspect of it is there's a lot going on right now that I think we underestimate the significance of. The shutting down of, we have oil issues coming out of the Middle East every 10 to 20 years. Well, the fact is that benefits states like Texas and Oklahoma that may start to reactivate wells that haven't been drilled because it hasn't been cost effective. So there's a lot of benefits here that I think we underestimate the significance of. Is that going to take 6 months before it fits into this? I mean, no, I don't think so. If somebody gets a job today, guess what? That doesn't take 6 months before they realize and get a paycheck. I mean, these things manifest themselves much more quickly. Remember I said the three issues, the three aspects that every issue is filtered through: strength, cost, and control. And those are all significant. And no one's going to be stronger than Trump. And I do think in part of what's going on in Iran that has maybe not looked the case, but then he rescues a pilot. Then we have Artemis go around the moon. There's a lot of things that I think are positive there that will begin to, again, manifest themselves. Cost, well, it hadn't been talked about a lot on CNN, but did anybody see that the cost of eggs is down from $7 to $2 for a carton? That's a pretty significant change. These things will begin to, as we begin to campaign and ads start to run, I think you'll see these stories be told a lot more effectively. And no, I don't think it's going to take 6 months.
Jim, we'll talk about issues. I mean, you're covering, part of your polling is always asking people what the number one issue is. No surprise, you're going to get the economy. But is it the economy and that's it, or what are you seeing in your poll?
Well, I think the interesting dynamic here is, and I might disagree slightly with Chris, is that the economy has been, and particularly prices, have really been persistent concerns, and they've been really stable across the last at least 18 months or so in terms of, when we ask people about specific concerns, three things have rotated in the top position: price of healthcare, price of everyday goods, price of housing, as top levels of economic concern within these overarching kind of negative economic attitudes, which are to some degree bipartisan. I mean, the levels of negative reviews of overall of the macro economy are higher among Democrats and especially independents than they are among Republicans, but they're not trivial. I mean, there are still Republicans that are noticing rising prices. So I think in terms of what's competitive there, it's very easy for Democrats to have a secondary issue in addition to staying on message on the economy, and that's by talking about leadership and political corruption and relying on negative partisanship to just say, look, these guys have been in power forever in Texas and at the national level. They're corrupt, and you see that turn up. I think the more interesting dynamic that is a challenge for Republicans as Republicans look for issues, particularly in the event that the economy does not recover and prices don't go down in the way that Chris might be suggesting, is what do you replace immigration and border security with? Because one of the most predictable results in our polling for a decade was when we asked Republicans, what's the most important problem facing the state, 50% or more said either immigration or border security. That line has gone from over 50% to down about a quarter in our polling. Whether that's exactly right or not, the trend in the decline is clear. You see it in other polling. And so there is something of a vacuum there that I think Republicans have to find something else to fill. And you can argue that they are a victim of their own success in terms of border security, and I think that's utterly fair. People are just not as worried about the border. It's not as salient as it used to be. But immigration has become a little bit more of a challenge because while the underlying attitudes of Republicans that we're seeing that favor more restrictive immigration politics, more strict immigration enforcement, is staying the same, there's a little more noise and lower levels of support when you ask about particular forms of enforcement that have gotten the most attention during the second Trump administration. I think the Trump administration has corrected course on that a bit and is probably benefiting from it, but there's still kind of a space there that I think Republicans are still going to need to fill because, frankly, I think particularly in the wake of the war, even if there is a faster recovery on oil prices, when we're talking about the price of oil dropping $20 in the last couple of days, it still dropped from 115 to 95, which is good for the Texas macroeconomy, but you know, it's a challenge to explain to the consumer who's not part of that employment or industrial sector that it's good for them to be paying more for gas.
Yeah, you made a great point there about the border security because in all of our polling that we've done the last 5 years, that's always been the number one. You know, right about COVID is when the economy and stuff would take it over, but literally it was only for a couple months. Yeah, and every single poll we ever did for 5 years, it was always border security. Our last poll that we just did, it was like fourth on the list. I mean, it was just like a huge, huge change. One of the dynamics, Mike, on the statewide races that I find so interesting here in Texas is that 5 of the 7 Democratic candidates are current state legislators. And of course, here in Texas, we have been very aggressive and very out front about all of the most controversial issues. So whether it's, you know, the gender modification of children or you know, boys and girls sports and abortion bans and things like that. So every single one of those members has had recent votes on the wrong side of 70 to 80% of Texas voters. So I wonder if that's why, strategically speaking, let's put on your strategy hats here, is that why you see these weird campaigns that are being run by Tallarico and Gina Hinojosa talking about millionaires and billionaires? No one's talking about what they're for and the issues. Do you think that there's a dynamic there? Because they really can't, because all the votes that they've taken over the last, you know, literally the last 2 or 3 years, put them on the wrong side of 80% of Texans.
Yeah, a couple things I'll put on my opposition research hat and come back to Tallarico, but they have a record. And it's, in campaigns, we always say you control 50% of the 4 grids as a campaign. It's called the Leesburg grid. You control everything you say about your own candidacy, and you control everything you want to say about your opponent. And they control everything they say about their candidacy and everything they say about the opponent. They're talking a lot about cost of living and prices and whatnot, and billionaires that need to pay their fair share. I do a lot of work in California, and the other side, to the left, the progressives, whatever you want to call them, always find another way to tax something that hurts businesses and consumers, and they always have to make somebody, corporations and billionaires, pay their fair share. They're so desperate out there they're actually having a wealth tax get on the ballot this fall, where billionaires will have to pay 5% of their net assets. So that's $50 million if you're a billionaire to the state of California just for having assets. Tallarico, wait till they do the op research on him and look at all the times he occupied the back mic on the state house floor, just going off on a tangent on, God's non-binary or whatever. There's a treasure trove of information, and it's incumbent upon the Republican campaigns that look at all those things that he said, look at what their votes are, and compare it to what they now seem to want to be.
Chris, for you, this may give you PTSD, but I want to take people back to 2018, since that was the last time Democrats really thought they were going to win.
It's twice today. You got to go back to 2018.
But actually, my question focuses on, are Democrats learning the wrong lesson from that? Is that really kind of an albatross around their neck because they thought they were seeing a trend, and then you fast forward to 2022, and all the statewide get blown out of the water? I mean, everybody won by 10 points, and now here they are again in 2024 saying, oh, we got a shot at winning, and I don't know, your analysis, I heard you say that you think we've got about a 10, or Republicans have about a 10-point advantage. So do you see any similarities, being in the trenches in 2018 with what Texas is looking at today?
Well, there's a lot I can say about 2018 that I probably shouldn't. So I'll try and be a little bit cautious about the conversation there. But it was, as Mike showed you, I mean, we were monitoring, and again, he was doing Patrick, I was doing Cruz. And so from that standpoint, we tracked right through Monday night, believe it or not, which I don't recommend. All it does is give you stress. But we saw what was going on. We saw it closing, and Mike showed you the numbers with the independents that we thought we pushed aside. We actually had a situation there, and Mike, I don't know if you remember this, but it was Trump went in and did a rally in Harris County, and it didn't affect the polling, but it affected the analytics. And Brian, I think you and I talked about this right after, is because it actually motivated somewhere around 200,000 more Democrats to turn out and vote. And that doesn't necessarily turn up in polling the same way it does whenever you're tracking people on an individual level, like if you're refreshing the model on an ongoing basis, which we were doing. And so it caused us to shift resources very quickly to try and match those. Now, we couldn't match them, but to mitigate those numbers by doing a hardcore targeting effort in West Texas. And that's why, as a part of my talk, I said the importance of a get out the vote operation, the importance of grassroots, the importance of staying involved with Republican organizations. And I think that is one thing that is overlooked, and it's something I give Abbott a lot of credit for. I mean, he has always built a turnout grassroots operation for every single time he's run. And that's important because without that, we probably would have lost races in 2018. Well, the benefit between, the similarity, I should say, to 2018 and 2024 is Governor Abbott is back on the ballot. He's going to spend a lot of money. He's going to have a grassroots organization. He's going to do a get out the vote program. And every single candidate on the ballot, every single Republican candidate on the ballot will benefit from that.
Yeah. Jim, you saw in some of the slides, I think it was Mike's, 97% of Democrats are going to vote for the Democrat, 98% of the Republicans are going to vote for the Republican. It was really the independents who want to throw them both, off the boat. Do you think that there may be a turnout issue with independents, that because, depending on how crazy things get, that it's not really the Republicans who stay home, which people are worried about, but do the independents stay home, which might potentially favor the Republicans?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that's, I don't work on campaigns like these guys do, and you guys can tell me I'm totally wrong, but it seems to me that's the most nerve-wracking part of working on campaigns, because independents are independents, and to those of you that consider yourself independents, no offense intended, but true independents, I don't mean independent leaners, I mean true independents tend to be less engaged with politics, less likely to vote to begin with, and they occupy a different space than the voters that the partisans are usually trying to target and mobilize. They're a different beast. So it's very hard to know whether, one of you, I always say independents are just crabby. I can't remember what description you used. I think it was you, Mike. But does that crabbiness translate into action or inaction, broadly speaking? And so, that's a fancy way of saying, I don't know. But I do think that one of the things we did see in 2018 was that it was a very mobilized, kind of inflamed political environment, in part because of the sui generis nature of Trump, his mode of governance, the counter-mobilizing impact he had on both Democrats and, I think, as it turned out, some independents. I think it's a little too soon to know what that looks like, because as we started with by saying, it's an incredibly volatile and dynamic political environment right now. Like, you know, I'm sitting here sort of disagreeing with Chris a little bit about how rapidly the prices of oil will go down and what prices are going to look like. But, you know, I don't know, and I don't think anybody else knows. That's why there's so much money moving around in the market right now. That's why there's so much volatility in the economy. So I think those independents are going to be more important, because if the 10-point advantage you guys seem to agree on is the central tendency, you know, it's going to have pretty long tails, I think, in this election. There's going to be a lot of variance across different races. And I think part of that is going to be how mobilized are those independents. And again, it's such a cop-out, particularly in front of a room full of people, but I do think that it's a little soon to tell. Mike talked about the predictive value of presidential approval levels. The other thing that has a lot of predictive value, worked by my colleague Chris Lejean from years ago, is kind of a couple of 6 weeks to about 2 months out, is where's presidential approval and where are views of the economy. And the presidential approval is kind of moving in one direction and maybe flattening out right now, but views of the economy are going to be difficult to predict. If you look at our trend data on the economy, it was going down pretty steadily, and then our December and our February polls showed a little bit of recovery. You know, the negatives were going up and the positives were going down, and then it started to tighten again. Late last year, maybe that was holiday optimism or whatever you want to call it, but even into February. Now, when we poll in April, I strongly suspect that that's going to open up again just because of the short-term impact of the war. Do I know where that's going to be in August? No.
On the independents, I don't know if they can bring up that last slide that I had. We didn't talk about it, but it was on there. Where do independents stand at a level 0 or level 10? They always trail Democrats and Republicans in terms of their interest in the election, and they're down there now. They're the green bar at the bottom. All right, they're 46% level 10, and they can get up to around 60%, but they're never at the level of interest that Democrats and Republicans are in the upcoming election.
Which shows the strategic value of targeting. I mean, the idea there is what you do from a campaign perspective is you find those that lean Republican, you make sure you get them out to vote. And that's the difference between winning and losing in an off-year election, a non-presidential year election.
We got a couple minutes left before I want to start getting to questions, so maybe this is kind of rapid fire, but I wanted to expand it out a little bit and just talk about the overall state of polling in general. It's always like right after the election, everybody says, oh, you know, pollsters are full of it, and it always kind of comes back around. Like
That's
right,
all year.
Right about now, people start to really, you know, and no matter what people say about polling, when a new poll comes out, everybody, you know, is you know, reports on it, and they all talk about it and whatever. There's been, I think, because of that phenomenon, there's been more of what I like to call, you know, activist polling, where you have these activist firms, and you know, in fairness, you know, you work for Republican candidates, so maybe somebody could claim that about you guys. But I feel like there's many more disreputable organizations that are just trying to get that 24-hour news cycle bump, or to get attention on their candidate or whatever. Is this pretty typical? Just rapid fire down. We'll start with you, Mike. You know, is this something that's happening more and
Congratulations, Mike.
No, I mean, if they made me Mike Basalis, the polling police, yeah, I'd be looking at all the demographics of all the polls and saying, yeah, there's things wrong, right? In 2017, in the October Fox News poll, the headlines that Fox put out, hurricanes erode Trump's job approval. Okay, really? Well, if you looked at the typical Fox News poll in that year, it was 7 points more Democratic than Republican, which I thought was a little bit more Democratic than the country. When he went from 41% job approval, Trump did, to 38 in 1 month, that 38% job approval was associated with a 12-point Democrat advantage in the poll, not 7. So was it the hurricanes or was it the demographics? Did anybody ever hear that 2016 polling was all off? Have you looked at it? The last 23 national polls averaged together had Hillary Clinton up on Trump by 2.7. She won by 2.1. As pollsters, we'd love to be within a point of the actual results. We're happy when that happens, right? Now, of course, Trump won the Electoral College. No, by and large, polling is still working out well. I think we have to be more mindful of the people that aren't taking surveys, and those that are taking them, are they representative of all ages, gender, race, ethnicity, and partisanship on a regional basis within a state, within a nation?
Chris, you worried
Yeah,
about?
I'll go real fast, but I agree and disagree. I think there are crimes of commission and crimes of omission, and I don't want to cast aspersion on which one's which, but I'll say this. The Washington Post had Joe Biden up by 18 points in Wisconsin the Wednesday before the Tuesday election. He won by less than 1 point. He did not lose 17 points, or Trump gained 17 points. That was a bad poll. To Mike's point, had someone been able to get at, and so this is where you become skeptical. When polls are released and they don't have the demographics, they don't have the sampling methodology, at that point, I throw it out. And I don't care if it's done by the Washington Post or Brian Phillips polling in Backyard Barbecue, whichever one. I mean, you need to be able to look at the strength behind it, because that was a bad poll, and it may have cost Trump his reelection.
And Jim, I mean, you're nonpartisan, and so you're trying to put out the information you get, and your methodology is fantastic. So I think you guys are definitely reputable. But do you worry about that? I mean, is it?
Oh, we worry constantly about it. Look, I mean, I think for me, on one hand, and I don't know how these. I mean, I would say it's the worry and the neurosis about it that helps fuel partially doing a better job. We sit around and, I'm kind of the professional worrier on our poll team, probably more than everyone else. But I would say this, look, polling's gotten harder, more complex, and it's kind of the Wild West out there. I mean, if you go to the political consultant meetings, I'm just astounded at the different, pardon my friend, the different shit people are doing, right? You kind of go, wait, you did that how? Yeah. Wait, you did what? Okay, well, So, I mean, and that speaks to your initial point that there's a lot of price pressure on this, as there is in every kind of public market, and particularly for publicly consumed polls. And it's become, more common for people to try to do a cheap poll to drive a quick bit of media attention and a quick add to your branding. And by the time somebody comes along later and says, well, how did you do that? That seemed crazy, that seemed wrong, et cetera. The news cycle moves so fast, per some of Chris's slides, that it gets lost. And that's a problem, But I also think that, to Mike's point, we're still better off that there is a lot of polling out there, because there's a chance that an individual poll, as we know, just the math, is going to be off. Yeah. And the public pressure to not admit that or not be transparent has gotten higher, I would say, as, you can thank, I think, the combination of Nate Silver and Twitter for that. I mean, no matter what you do, there's somebody on Twitter, whether it's, and you were talking about partisanship. I think actually the more vicious fighting is the intra-party fighting. Mm-hmm. During this Senate race, the Cornyn and, I mean, you guys were part of this, the Cornyn-Paxton camps, and frankly, particularly the Tallarico-Crockett camps, were willing to just get out the long knives and stab you repeatedly if you got something they didn't like.
Yeah. Well, we're going to jump to questions now. So thank you all who have submitted questions, and I've got them here. I'm not being rude. It's just they're texting me the questions. So, but on that point about the intra-party stuff, that's what the first question I got, which I think is fantastic, is what is the effect the growing split between the Republican Party on certain foreign policy will have on the election going forward? And there's a mounting conservative backlash against what's going on in Iran from certain pockets. Does that kind of thing, again, it ultimately depends on how this thing ends between now, or if it ends between now and the election. But are you seeing anything in the data that shows that now you've got to worry about this as a new front in your election? Anybody jump in?
I'm not. We've looked, and we are not seeing anything in the data that is having an impact yet. It clearly pops up. You see it on the hyper online universe, but it's not impacting election results yet. And I do fear it does. I mean, it's not an unfounded fear, but we've looked at it in a few different races and nationally, and it's not bubbling to the top in a way that I am concerned is going to impact the intensity or likelihood to vote Republican.
I would say one of the things that's interesting that we've, and I saw this in the think the CBS YouGov poll that ran maybe 3 weeks after the war started. And the thing that I thought was interesting to your question was you look at the Republican breakdowns and you do crosstabs with people who say they identify as a MAGA Republican or they don't, that actually the support for the war effort was higher among the MAGA Republicans than the non-MAGA Republicans, which to me, I think at first cut probably felt a little bit counterintuitive to our understanding of what the MAGA movement, whatever that was about. But to me, the takeaway that was interesting about that was the degree of President Trump's personalist influence on that movement. And so that's the kind of thing we will be in the field soon, so I don't have Texas data on that yet, but it's one of the things I'm super interested in.
Mike?
What's different today versus years past, and Gallup did a huge study on this called Rally Around the Flag, and when there's an international incident, Republicans, Democrats, and independent voters will usually rally around whoever the president is, and we haven't seen that in recent years. So the one thing that the United States has going for it is they're usually very successful in these conflicts. I mean, look at the liberation of Kuwait against Iraq and such. So the outcome of all this is going to play a big part in voters' attitudes this fall.
All right, here's another one this is kind of out of left field, but I hear this all the time on social media, and so I want to ask you guys about it. How do pollsters reach the likely voters today, as most people do not answer their phone, their cell phone or their home phone? As a regular voting Republican, I have not been polled in years. Nobody ever called me. I hear that all the time. So how does this work? Anybody want to jump in and explain?
My mentor was Lance Torrance, who, by the way, just passed away a few weeks ago, and Chris knew him. And when I started with his firm in 1989, his phone supervisor, Phyllis, was showing me around how the sausage is made, so to speak. He had 167 phones in North Houston, and she was beside herself. What are we going to do? We're moving from 1.5 refusals for every completed interview to 2 refusals. How are we going to survive in this industry? 12 years ago, we were hitting 13, 14 refusals for every completed interview, and it's been pretty consistent. It takes a lot more dials today than it did before, but we've gotten creative. Please, if you get a text to your cell phone that says, we're interested in your opinions, click here to take the survey, take it online. We don't have to just read the questions over the phone. So we're giving respondents multiple opportunities to take a survey. It's just taking a lot more effort. Jim mentioned the cost of surveys. To do a survey properly and to get the demographics correct, we have to do a lot more work than we used to have to do. And that's why when Chris mentioned, if you can't see the demographics, how do you know it's accurate? No poll in Texas should be even Democrat, Republican. No poll in California should be that way. That's a Democratic state. This is a Republican state.
So is there anywhere that you can sign up to be called for a poll? Is that a thing? Can you?
You can sign up to be on panels, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Harris used to attract people into their panels. You can ask to be on a focus group.
And it's actually, you get up, I mean, people are always asking now if you want to be in a pool as part of frequent flyer programs and things like this. I mean, I think I would add to what Mike's saying, and I think that some of this is lurking a little bit in kind of Chris's sort of movement away from polling a little bit in his presentation, is that in the big picture, there's just a trade-off that's gone on. When we could count on higher response rates, we could count on the statistical laws of randomization to help us get those samples and have them be representative. As that's become harder, something else has happened though, in that we have, sorry to be creepy about it, but we have a lot more data about our respondents, and that helps us when we have to sort of try harder to get representative samples, and it helps us, in weighting those and being able to do the weights in a way that don't cause error.
And that's a good segue into kind of the last topic I want to talk about, which is technology. And I mean, AI, I know you're doing a lot of cool stuff, Chris, with Eyes Over. Are y'all using AI or any new platforms and new technologies in order to not just collect public opinion, but then to analyze public opinion in a way that's different than what we've done 10 years ago?
Well, yeah, that's what Eyes Over does. So you almost give me an opportunity to do a commercial there. But what we do is we analyze and ingest all online conversation. X, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram comments, YouTube comments.
You have to read Reddit?
Yeah,
I'm
we don't have
pity
to.
your
We do it so
staff.
you don't have to. But then we use neural language processing for the purposes of then analyzing and segmenting it into different support scores. And from that, it allows us to understand and see where approve, disapprove is, what issues matters I showed you, where races are. If any of you use meltwater, think of it as meltwater for politics. And so, yeah, we've had tremendous success with it nationally here in Texas. In fact, I wasn't there. Again, Brad was running it, but they got 49 out of 50 states right for Trump in the 2024 election. And I had the opportunity to come in and join as CEO, and the utilization of artificial intelligence for the analysis of all online conversations, I think, is where the future of our industry goes.
All right, last question.
Mike might disagree with
just
that.
add,
Yeah, give him a counter.
there's a very interesting qualitative aspect to AI. We started experimenting with this a few years ago when we ask open-ended questions. Why are you voting for so-and-so? And what I like to do is quantify those responses. Is it because of the characteristics of the candidate? Is it because of the issues that they've been communicating? Is it something else? Or just because you like their ideology or their party? And so we worked with AI, and it's getting better to be able to let a machine look at the responses and categorize them for us. And it goes a lot quicker than having somebody read through 1,000 responses and put them into different buckets.
Jim, you guys still just using the old-fashioned phone?
Well, no, I mean, we've always been doing kind of old-fashioned internet. But what I would say about AI, I mean, for our part, we're pretty cautious about that. We have our public profile is such that we try to be pretty careful working at the university, et cetera. But I agree with what I'm hearing here both is, I mean, the first beachhead for this really is content analysis. Being able to take textual analysis, the AIs have gotten pretty good at that. We're using that even in some of our teaching feedback tools where we ask students how it went during the week, what they understood, what they didn't. You know, if we have a class, these large online classes of 1,000 people or more, we couldn't possibly hand code that in a way that the intelligence we get that to feedback on teaching becomes actionable. And Josh Blank and I are experimenting with that in a big class to pretty good effect, I think. But we're being pretty careful with it with polling. We're using it a little bit with open-ended responses and playing around with it, but nothing, we're not ready to implement stuff yet.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here for the last one. You don't have to tell me which race, but yes or no, do Democrats pick up any of the statewide in 2026? Mike.
Because it's a Republican-leaning state still, at this moment, I say no.
Chris?
No.
I thought you were going to turn the mic off and then answer Mike. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, look, to go back to the original metaphor, I mean, I think there's some uncertainty about this, but, you know, if I was to, like what everybody's doing now, if I was to gamble on this, I would not gamble on it happening.
Great, guys, we're going to have to leave it right there. Ladies and gentlemen, can you help me thank our panelists today?